Well, Jim, I appreciate you taking time to come down.
Well, I'm glad to have something to do, thank you.
There you go. Oh, like I said earlier, I would really like to talk about your time on the commission and serving on the governing body for the City of Ottawa, but I'd like to start back, what brought you to Ottawa, maybe tell us a little bit about your growing up. And
Okay. Well, I grew up in Clay Center. I was born in Alabama. And Dad was a telephone man and was assigned a job at Clay Center. And so we moved there when I was just a little tyke. Graduated from high school there. Had an opportunity to play football at KU or K-State or Ottawa University. And I decided that KU and K-State were just too big for me. And I liked the coaches at Ottawa University. Dick Peters was the head coach. And so I decided to come down here. And I spent 4 years with Uncle Sam during the Korean conflict. Came back, finished school, and couldn't find a good teaching job or coaching job. I would work my way through college at Bob's Clothes Shop in the 200 block on Main. And so I managed the store there for a year or so. And then I bought the gas station at 4th and Main. It was a Standard Oil station, and had it for about 12 years, I guess, but had good employees. At one time I had 11 employees. 7 of them were part-time high school and college students, which they needed it and I needed it too. And I belonged to Chamber of Commerce and Ottawa Industrial Development when it was first getting started back in the late 40s. Mm-hmm. I had joined when I went into business. And I was a member of the JCs, who were a bunch of young businessmen and employees of businesses all over town, about 50 or 60 of us, I guess. You could call us Young Turks. We didn't like the way the community was being run. We thought we were stagnating. The old timers were way too conservative and didn't want to hear about anything new. So the guys talked me into running for the open position of commissioner, city commissioner. And so I said, well, if you'll take the petitions out and get enough people to say that they'll vote for me, why, I'll give it a shot and see what happens. I had no clue what I was getting into. We had a 3-member city commission. One was the mayor, who was responsible for the police department, fire department, and the cemeteries. And essentially, about all he did was make sure his cronies got hired to a city job. The commissioner of finance ran the city hall, worked with the city clerk and the city treasurer. And then the job that I was elected to was Commissioner of Streets, Alleys, Utilities and Bridges, and anything else that came up, I guess. But that included electrical production and distribution, water production and distribution, sewage plant and all of the sewers in town, and things of that nature. I discovered after I got sworn in that the mayor and the finance commissioner weren't particularly interested in anything besides what they were doing. And it irritated me because it's supposed to be a 3-member commission, and I thought equal conversations and a 2 on a 3 ought to make sure things worked. It took me about 3 months before I finally got the commissioner of finance to go along with me on a couple things that all 3 of us had to have input. The superintendent of utilities at that time had been here for a long time, nice guy, but he was a lousy commissioner, a lousy superintendent. Our electric distribution system was in terrible condition. I found out when I visited the power plant and all of the utility people, we were in desperate condition. We had outages on a regular basis. People were only interested in the electric distribution when they turned the switch on. They wanted lights to work. When they turned the faucet on, they wanted clean water. and I thought it was our responsibility, and in my case, I was in charge. So I went in, we met on Wednesday nights. I went into the superintendent's office Wednesday morning, and I said, I'd like to have your resignation on my desk tonight. And he said, all right, but he said, we've been talking about having a meter repair department, water meter and electric meter. And I said, yeah, and he says, could I stay on for a year until retirement and set that up and operate it? And I said, all right, I'll let you do that. Because at that time, the meters were not owned by the city, they were owned by the individual property owner. And if one went bad, we would repair it and charge them for the repairs on the thing. A few years later, Don Hamilton and I decided there's no reason for them to be owning those things, so we owned them, so we started having them signed over to us. But anyway, I started looking for a utilities commissioner, superintendent. For some reason or another, I had met the superintendent at McPherson, who was rated one of the top men in the countryside. So I called him and offered him a job. He said, nah, he didn't want to take it, but he said, I think I know a good man that will do you an excellent job. I said, I'll call him and ask him. So he called a guy named Don Hamilton, who was, I think, at Jetmore at that point. And Don called me, and we talked on the phone a little bit, and he said he'd come up for an interview. We met on a Sunday morning. The commissioners, all three commissioners, met with Don at City Hall, and we found out that he'd come in Friday and had toured the town with his wife. And we didn't know that. And after we talked to him about what we expected, and he said, I'll tell you what, this is what I find wrong, this is what needs to be done. He said, if you hire me, I'm gonna do it my way. I'll get your okay, but I'm gonna do it my way. Charlie Queen was the finance commissioner, and he says, if you don't hire him right now, I'm going to. And so we hired him on the spot. It was probably one of the smartest things I ever did in my life, was to hire Don Hamilton to run our utilities department, because the men that worked and the women that worked in the utilities department had good trust after they found out about him. We were able to upgrade most of the utility distribution system. We were working on upgrading the production of electric and water at the plant. So much of our stuff out there dated to the 1930s and maybe even before. And when not too long after Don came, electricity went off at home, and I thought, oh my gosh, now I'm going to hear about it. I walked over to the back door, and it was just at dark. And I walked over to the back door and looked out, and I didn't see a glow over the neighborhood or over the town. I thought, we're not all out, are we? So I got in the car and went down to the power plant. Sure enough, the main cable coming out of the plant, production plant, going to the distribution, or to the distribution center outside, transformer station, had exploded. That had been there since the day they built the power plant, and it had been through at least 51 flood, and probably more before that, nobody knows. But anyway, it blew. We called in all of our employees. They worked all night long building a temporary bridge from the production to the distribution, and got people back on the next day. And I thought those guys were the greatest guys in the world. They really did the job for the people of this community. We had just put, the city had just put in a new generating engine, and we were looking to put in another one, and that was done on my watch. We only had one steam turbine left, and it was from the 1920s or 30s. I think it was a 1250 kVA. But anyway, we started upgrading everything, and Hamilton did a superb job. We were in the process of flood control, And I wound up going to Washington with a group of Ottawans to plead for having the Meredith scene involved in the Missouri Valley Flood Control Association. And Lamar Phillips was probably the best-known man in Washington, D.C. from Kansas. They called him Mr. Flood Control. And when we went to a hearing, and the old boy that was in charge of the hearing was House of Representatives. I cannot remember his name. I've been there forever. And the mayor of Kansas City, Kansas, got up and started his haranguing, and the guy dropped the hammer and he says, "Have a seat." And this guy had never been told that, so he sat down, and that congressman looked out across us and he said, "Is Mr. Flood Control here?" Lamar got up and says, "That's me." "Come on up, Lamar." And it was just like two old friends. They had been there before. And Lamar told them what we were looking for. We knew we were going to get it because Lamar was working hard with this old boy. He was a newspaper man, and I always admired the guy. Several of the commissioners had relatives or friends in Washington. Lamar and I didn't. So we'd get talking about, he'd tell me stories about old-time things in Ottawa when he first came here and up to the present time. We had some businessmen who were characters. I'll tell you, they were hilariously funny. I won't pass on any of the stories. Yes, I will. There was one of them I will. It cracks me up. There were about 6 or 8 of our leading citizens back in the 1930 period or early 40s. And they met on a Saturday night, played cards, and had a few drinks. And one of the city clerk happened to be one of them at that time, and he passed out. Well, all these other guys thought, let's have some fun. So they put him in a casket over to the funeral home and took him out and put him on the front porch on Main Street, somebody's house on Main Street. The next day, the phone rang at the funeral home, and they said, "Have you missed the body sometime?" The funeral home director says, "Well, no, I don't think so. Why?" It says, "Well, there's one in one of your caskets on our front porch." So they went out there to find out what was going on. And it was a city clerk who had passed out and was sleeping it off in the casket. And I always looked at those guys from then on. I knew all of them and worked with a lot of them, and with a jaundiced eye as to what kind of humor they really had in the earlier days. But with the help of the JCs, and we changed commissioners a couple of times over the 6 years I was on the city commission, we were able to get a lot of things done for the City of Ottawa as a group, as a unit, instead of piecemeal. And we got rid of the cronyism that was rampant in the thing. We hired good people. I had to fire a couple of guys for misconduct on the job, and they didn't like doing that, but that's the way it was. They knew what the rules were, and so they had to follow suit. One of the things I'm most proud of is that when we were building the levees, all the trees along the river and the stumps and everything would, where the baseball diamonds are on West 2nd Street, they were all piled up on that area. And Hamilton came to me one day and he said, "You know, Jim, if we clean that place up out there," he said, "that might make a good place for ball diamond." Yeah, it really would. We didn't have just the 2 over in Forest Park. And a lot more teams playing. Bob Killow and Dwight Hayworth volunteered to use their heavy equipment to get that stuff cleaned out of there. And Don McFarland, who was superintendent of streets at the time, we only had 2 motor graders. One was small and one was a fair-sized one. But he volunteered after hours, and since this was going to be a city project, he could use our equipment to level what those guys didn't quite get done. I was up through Manhattan one time going up to see my folks at Clay Center. Why did this day I went by what they call Seco Park, a city county park. And they had 4 baseball diamonds back to back with a concession stand in the middle of it. I thought, that's what we need in Ottawa. So when I came back, I sat down with the guys and we drew out the plan, or sketched it out anyway. And I don't remember who the city engineer was at the time. George Leadham or Bob Lister, one or the other, I don't remember which one. And they surveyed the place out. We laid out 4 diamonds in the configuration that it is now, except that we had to take one of them out and use it for a parking lot.
No, yeah.
We developed the one that was facing to the southeast first. That whole thing was built with light poles that we had pulled and replaced and had them stacked up, so we used those. We were looking to put lights on them, and we're trying to figure out where we were going to get the money to do it with. And some salesman came into town from one of the electrical companies and we stopped in to see Don, and they came by and picked me up at the business, and we went down to Kaiser's drugstore down in the 400 block at that time to have coffee and discuss a few things. And Don and I were discussing the need for the lights. The guy says, "What are you talking about?" So we explained to him what we were looking for, and he says, "Oh," he said, "I can fix you up." Yeah, but can we afford them? He says, "You don't have to worry about that." He said, "We had a big fire in the warehouse," and he said, those things are practically giveaways." "Really?" Don says, "I don't remember ever reading or hearing anything about your fire." And he said, "Don't ask too many questions." That guy provided us with light fixtures that were up there for years and may still be there forever, I don't know. But I don't think we paid $500 to light that entire baseball field.
Wow.
The electrical production people, electrical distribution people, Don Foreman, I can't think of your name now.
I should know, but I can't remember.
It'll come to me
Yeah.
tomorrow. Those guys worked after hours on their own time, using city equipment to put up the lights. We used wire that we had accumulated to wire it all. Then we started looking for fencing, and I have no idea at this point. We found some used fencing someplace, and the guys on the city crews volunteered along with some dads and a few businessmen to put that field together. We built the press box and put up the bleachers. I don't suppose we spent $2,000 to put that thing up out
Wow.
there. But it's been named after one of the best men I ever knew in my life, Orlis Cox. I worked with Orlis a couple of summers on the recreation programs. I ran the baseball and the softball programs for him. And he was a great man as far as I'm concerned, a very Christian man. You want to do things right. That's the way all of us ought to. But we had a street sweeper and complained. People were always complaining. Main Street was brick. And of course, brick streets are always dirty. Dutch Weinecke was our operator. And so I told the superintendent of the streets, McFarland, I said, "We want to run that street sweeper 24 hours a day. So people won't be complaining about how dirty Main Street is and the side streets in the downtown area particularly." And so we did. We ran that sucker. We built our own brooms on days when we couldn't work outside on cold weather or rainy days or stuff. We didn't have something. The guys in the shops would rebuild the brooms on that thing. Today you can't do that. We built a utility storage building just east of the power plant, which is still there today. I assume they still use it for storage and
I think
stuff.
they
I
do.
don't know. But we also, where the police department is now, we built a maintenance shop and gas pumps down there, because even though I was in the gas business, I thought we were paying more than we needed to be paying, so we ought to be buying it bulk. We could have a mechanic working on the cars and trucks, and the men could work on them in certain times. So we were saving money there. And at the time, we were the third cheapest electric utility rates in the state of Kansas. The Board of Public Utilities in Kansas City, Kansas was first, McPherson was second, and we were third. And the McPherson was first for a reason. And this is part of what I remember about the guy. Their superintendent was visiting in New York for whatever reason. And he was down on the wharfs looking at the river or the ocean or whatever. And he saw some big diesel engines sitting there. So he asked somebody about them. Well, it turns out there were two huge diesel engines, the generators, and everything that went with a power plant that was put together to be sent to Saudi Arabia. It's, for some reason or other, was a change of personnel or something in their hierarchy in Saudi Arabia, and they didn't want it. So here it sits. So he contacts whoever is in charge, and he says, "What would you take for it?" And they said, "Where do you want to put it?" He said, "McPherson, Kansas." And he said, at that time, I'm thinking, I don't remember exactly, but I'm thinking to put in a power plant, you were paying like $16 a kVA or something of that nature. They would sell it to him and deliver it for $2. He came home and told his city commissioner, council, whatever they've got out, the commission, I think, what they want to do. They built an entirely new power plant building, built a stub railroad in there, brought that in, put it all in there, and I was in there after it was finished. It was absolutely marble, tile, glistening, beautiful, and I think it's still there today operating. But that guy knew how to do things. That's one of the reasons I had a lot of faith in him when he was recommending various and sundry things. But being on the city commission, I wound up serving the City of Ottawa as a representative on a lot of state committees that had to do with the municipal utilities, the League of Kansas Municipalities, all of the public utilities in eastern Kansas, from the Board of Public Utilities in Kansas City to Coffeyville, got together and said, we need to tie together because we're being pushed by the private companies. So we had a meeting with, I'm thinking this, Board of Public Utilities, Ottawa, Osawatomie, Garnett, Fort Scott, Pittsburgh, Iola, Chanute, and Coffeyville, all down through there. And we set up a deal where we'd tie everybody together, and as we needed to expand, the Board of Public Utilities would be the first installation, Ottawa would be the second, and then we just moved down the line as we needed to increase production. We ran into a stiff breeze in the Kansas legislature. The private utilities weren't going to hear of that. And they put the quietus to us. We couldn't get the right of way to produce transmission lines. Fortunately, in later years, back in the what, or 90s or 80s or whatever it was, public utilities finally were to get together and save the customers some money by having a cooperative of some kind, which we're still operating on, I guess. We had even made arrangements with the Southwest Power Administration out of Arkansas and Oklahoma to buy some hydroelectric power, which is as cheap as you can get. And we had to give up on that. And I was really just disappointed that we didn't get a chance. Bob Wellington was the editor and publisher of the Ottawa Herald. And he was bound and determined that we ought to get rid of our power plant. And I was bound and determined we weren't going to, so we clashed a lot. He wrote a lot of stuff, and finally Don Hamilton and I went over to Paola. I knew a guy over there, and I said, we would like to use one of your electric bills as a selling point. He said, sure, help yourself. I said, there may be repercussions. He said, I'm a big man, I can take it. So we brought it back over, took a picture of it, bought a full-page spread. Here's what they're paying for Kansas City Power and Light. That same bill in Ottawa would cost you this much. It was a lot of difference, a whole lot of difference. And of course, the Kansas City Power and Light, KG&E, KP&L, seemed like there was a fourth one, I can't remember now, but they were the ones that were trying to get rid of the public utilities. And so after we bought that ad and put that in the paper, people kind of came down on Wellington for thing, and he didn't like me for a long time, and I stayed away from him. In his later years, we finally were able to work together on various committees, the Chamber of Commerce and what Industrial Development. His wife Dottie is a fine woman. She's a great cook. Boy,
Oh my, yes.
she used to put up all kinds of stuff. Anyway, we got a lot accomplished. There were some things that I was disappointed in during my time. 40 acres, I think it was, south of 15th Street where a creek runs through there on East 15th, and just west of Orchard Heights. And there was 40 acres of wooded area in there with, and right in the middle of it was 10 acres of clear area, and they wanted to sell it. And I thought that'd make a terrific public park. We could have trails through there, and we could use some of the lumber out of there to build the bridges across the creek and all this kind of stuff. And I got them to put it on the ballot, and the public didn't want to spend like $15,000 or something like that to buy the ground. And so that didn't get done, but many years later we finally got a park on the south side, which I thought we needed badly. We'd also finally got one on the north side, besides the Forest Park, which needed badly. Being the street commissioner entailed a lot of discussions with people, and there's a couple of things that always stick in my mind. The first one was I hadn't been in office but just about 1 year. And we had tremendous snows in those years, and they always lasted a long time. And so this particular time, I got thinking about when I was a kid growing up, how we used to use the sleds going down the hills in the street. Well, there wasn't a lot of traffic on the street, so it wasn't too much of a bother. So I let the traffic run over Cedar Street between 7th and 5th. For a day, and it got it pretty well packed down. Then I barricaded it arbitrarily without asking anybody. And there were hundreds of kids showed up with their sleds to slide on those 2 blocks, and no traffic there. Well, the public got upset about that a little bit by closing Cedar Street. So the next year, I decided we got to do that for those kids again. So I closed down 4th Street from Cherry, I think it was Cherry, down to about Poplar. And I mean, literally, there were thousands of kids from all over town. Well, then the people on the north side said, why don't you close the street over here for us? Well, you try to find a sloping street for more than a block, any place on the north side, it's really difficult to do. But we did wind up for a block and a half someplace over there. I don't remember now where it was. So the kids on the north side didn't have to lug their stuff all the way across town to get through. But the kids had a blast. One of the guys on the street crew says, Jim, he said, I got an idea. And I said, let's hear it. He said, that small diamond, baseball diamond over in Forest Park, we could take a blade in there after the freezes real good, and we can run a bead around there about 8 inches high with a blade. And he said, after it's frozen good, we can flood it with about 4 or 5 inches of water. And when it freezes, we have an ice skating rink. And I said, that's a good idea. So we did for 2 years. After I got off the commission, they quit doing it. But we had all kinds of kids and adults over there ice skating on that skating rink. I was in favor of getting rid of the old swimming pool. It was a terrible waste of public monies. But the public didn't want to do it and build a new one because it was going to cost money. And eventually, after we tore it down a couple of years later, We spent another $100,000 to build than we had if we'd have built it 2 years earlier, saved $200,000. But anyway, when they tore it down, I said, let's just fill it up to within 2 feet of the top and pack it down good, and we used that for a nice skating rink.
I remember that.
You do you?
Yeah.
We were taking some trees down over there in the park, and we cut them up in parts, small parts, and piled them up and made some fire pits so you could warm yourself and ice skate at the same time. I think they did that for 2 winters, and I thought that was a good deal for the public. Make use of what you've got when you don't have much.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't skate on the river.
Yeah.
So that brings up another one too. When we were working on the levee system, we were at meeting with the Corps of Engineers in Kansas City, and I said something. We're sitting in this big place there, and I said, you know, it would be nice when we look at the pictures of the old Mer de Seine. People were riding boats up and down the Mer de Seine, fishing, sunning themselves, and just having a good time. I said, we don't seem to be able to do that anymore. Why couldn't we put a little cofferdam, maybe 2 feet deep, down there, just short of where the sewage disposal plant is on the curve down there? That guy, he came out of his chair, that will never happen. He said, we want that water to come through there as fast as we can get it through there. Ah, come on. Boy, there was no discussion on that. That was out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So that did away with the picture of some of us had of being able to, people go across the levee and use the river. And it's really a great resource.
Oh my.
It's all green. People talk about greening up everything. We have a green deal running all the way through Ottawa. We've got several parks with greenery. We've got a postage stamp park down here at 2nd Street. And those are the kind of things that make a town and worthwhile. We've also got a bunch of people, a ton of people, who are interested in making the town livable. And I think that's one of the great things. When the young men wanted to get me elected, that's the kind of thing we were looking to. Not many of those guys are still alive, let alone live in Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
But we had visions of some of the stuff that are taking place today. And I just hope that the younger generation doesn't let them stall it out just because the old guys don't like what they're doing. Because it does pay off in the long run. We hired, I can't even figure the name out of Kansas City, engineering outfit. Maybe it was Burns and Mac, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
To do a 10-year study for us. Where would we be 10 years from now? And that would have been about 1962 or 3, someplace along in there. I served from 59 to 65.
Okay.
Their prediction was that by 1970, the town would be 20 to 25,000, I believe. You may be able to find this report someplace stored.
I think I've seen it.
I don't recall the exact on the thing, but because they said that progress was marching down I-35. It was just moving this way vastly quickly. Well, then it got to Olathe, and all of a sudden it went east and quit coming south. And so we have not picked up what they were predicting to have happen, because all of a sudden Johnson County began to fill in over there to the Missouri border, and people didn't go west and south like they expected it to happen. And it is happening a little bit now around Gardner and Edgerton, but not to the extent that the engineers thought it would. But it was a busy time. We got $100 a month, and that figured out to about 14 cents an hour.
That's about what they make now.
Yeah, right.
Well, it is what they make now. But you all put in a lot more time on it.
We did, because we had to make all the decisions. That we didn't have a city manager or anything like that. There was one other thing that we had a terrific snow, and just like we had here recently, 9 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, whatever. And we only had, I think we only had 3 2.5-ton flatbed trucks one front end loader, a couple of motor graders.
Mhm.
And so we only had, including the superintendent, I think we had 12 guys on the street crew. And they were working themselves silly. So I said, let's just pile it up in the middle of the street, right down the middle of Main Street, and we'll pick it up as we can. The very next day, I went into my place of business, and some old timer came in and he says, well, I see we got a Johnson's Ridge again. I said, what do you mean a Johnson's Ridge? He said, oh, back in the 30s, I think it was, we had a street commissioner named Johnson. And he piled the snow up in the middle of Main Street just like that out there. And it was there until May. I just walked right out the door and over to City Hall and I said, let's set up a routine with a crew. Let's hire extra people. Everybody's got a dump truck, get them hired. We want those streets clean by tomorrow night. And we did. Those guys worked their fannies off, and we hired every dump truck in Ottawa. We got a blower of some kind from John Deere, and they blew a truck full of that stuff, but they discovered they couldn't get it out of there because it packed it in too tight, so we had to take that back. In those days, when we got rid of it, the old Locust Street Bridge had planks in it. They'd take out 4 planks and then back the trucks up there and dump it down into the river.
No kidding.
That's how we got rid of it. Several years later, I don't remember when, but they piled it all up in that vacant spot by the Locust Street Bridge, just west of the Depot Museum.
Mhm.
And it was piled high over there.
Mhm.
And they had a contest. You could make a guess as to when the last bit of it would go.
Mhm.
And of course it was May, I think, or sometime in there before it finally got gone. And whoever won the prize, it was probably a $10 gift certificate someplace, but everybody had a lot of fun with it. And it's a good thing to have a town doing something like that.
You bet.
So, that help you any on what was going on?
That's
There's a lot more too that.
sure. Well, that you were certainly involved in a lot of key elements. The
Yeah.
levee system is what a blessing that is into this community. I mean, we saw that in 2007. I
From the
think
very
it was.
beginning. When they finished it, we had to take over mowing because the Corps of Engineers, once they turned it over to us, it was ours.
Right.
And it's kind of dangerous on that pitch to try to pull a mower down across there, even with a sickle bar on the side of it. So I give many of our employees credit for having the brains to figure out support systems that they could use, what tractors we had to keep them from turning over on the driver.
Mhm.
Eventually, the manufacturers of tractors and mowers and stuff came up with some stuff that addresses the problem, but most of what we had, the guys that worked for the city, using their brains and their hands, made the stuff that worked for us.
Mhm.
And I was always proud of the men that worked under me. I knew them all by name. I couldn't tell you who they were to this day because most of them have been gone for many years, but the one guy that was the main gun was Don McFarland. I wanted the Recreation Commission to name one of those ball diamonds out there for him, but they never have done it because he spent hours, even after we finished everything, he would still leave his job at the end of the day, go over and drag the field,
Mhm.
get it ready to play.
Mhm.
We even had one time, we had a tournament. I don't remember which group, it was a senior league tournament, I think, which meant the older boys. And it had rained for days and that soggy mess. Bob Hamilton was the Standard Oil agent. And I said, how much would it cost us to buy 100 gallons of kerosene? Well, he worked out a deal for us. And I went around and collected the money, and we sprayed it all over that ball diamond out there on the dirt part of it. and lit a match to it with a fire truck standing by. And we burned that all down, and somebody got a hold of it, and I don't know who did it to this day, got a hold of the National Guard. They got a hold of the National Guard in Topeka, and they brought down a helicopter. And once the fire was out, they sat down on that thing and let the blade dry out the field a little bit. There must have been 50 dads, and some of them city employees, with rakes that raked on that thing and get that field ready. And we started that tournament on time and finished it on time. It tells you something about the people of this community who will pitch in. I've always been proud of the people of this town. When something needs to be done, there's people that'll do it. It's difficult today to get young people to join service organizations, but there are some things that they will step forward and help out with. And Ottawa Recreation Commission is a terrific thing for this town. I'm very glad to have had a part of it at one time. I think you probably ran some track for me after I went to teaching school and coaching, so it's been a great town. Doris and I raised our kids here. We had opportunities to leave, take jobs at other locations, but I felt comfortable here. I liked the people here. I liked the location and everything else. That help any?
That's great. Now, how long did you teach?
25 years or so.
25 years.
Yeah.
So you had the business there at 4th and Main.
Right. Well, I had that, and I went. The president of the school board was a customer of mine, Standard Oil customer. We built a new high school. He came in one day and he said, "Jim, you've been coaching sports in town for nothing. You want to do it for pay?" I said, "What do you got in mind?" He says, "We're going to move all the coaches we have out to the high school. We need to hire them for the junior high." He said, "Go down and talk to the superintendent." So I went down, and I had a degree in teaching, but I hadn't used it for 10 years. So I was going to have to take additional hours to get updated. He said, "Well, we'd hire you." He said, "Now we need a football coach who will also be the head track coach. The basketball head coach will be assistant track and assistant football." He said, we can hire football coaches a dime a dozen." And I said, "Stop right there." I said, "I've never wanted to be a dime a dozen guy. I'd be glad to take that basketball job." He's hired, so we signed papers right there on the spot. I don't remember what I was getting paid, but it wasn't very much, I know that. But I continued to have the station. I had a couple of good employees that took care of it most of the time, and I still worked there on off hours, and I finally sold it in '72. Ben Moore was a classmate of mine and a teammate of mine at Ottawa University. Was coaching at Ottawa University, and in '75 he came around and he said, "Jim, come coach with me." And I said, "Well, I just signed a contract. We'll have to see if I can get out of the contract coaching at high school." He said, "I'll take care of it." Okay. So the next day he called and he said the superintendent said he'd release me. And so I went to work out there after school coaching football for the next 18 years. And probably the reason they kept me around was because I was the only one that knew anything about the kicking game. And so they made me special teams coach, and, and I could handle that. But I coached running backs, I coached quarterbacks, I coached the defensive backs and linebackers. I never wanted to coach the offensive defensive line. And some of the guys that coached with me at school, Brad O'Day, for example, helped coach out there. And we won some games, we lost some games, but we had a good time. Had a lot of good people. Those players still come back and look me up and thank me for whatever it was that we did for them. So you never know when you're dealing with young people. One time I took the time to sit down and try to figure out about how many young people I had dealt with in my teaching and coaching career. And it had to be somewhere between 15 and 20,000 And there's no way in the world I can remember all their names. A lot of them I remember faces, but the names, when they tell me who they are, I put it together a little bit. But I've enjoyed our time in Ottawa and coaching and teaching and working with city government. I've served on all kinds of city and county boards and citizens committees, advisory committees of one kind or another, and chaired some of them, and just been a good life.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to come visit with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me.
And thanks for all the service that you've given to the community, to the school district, to the university. And I want to thank you for being my coach.
I hope you did. I can remember one time when we were running a junior high, we were freshmen, we were running a meet at Lawrence, at Haskell. And you were running the 100-yard dash. And I'm sitting up there on the first row in the stands right at the finish line, and some other coaches there click at the start and click at the finish, you won the thing. I'm looking down there and I'm looking at 9.9. I said, what'd you guys get? 9.9. What'd you get out there on the official? 10 flat. So you didn't get your 9.9, you got 10 flat.
And you know, I never did get my 9.9.
No, you didn't.
I got 9.95 a couple of times, but I never did get the 9.9.
Well, if I remember right, Don made you a half miler out in high school, didn't he?
I ran the quarter mile
Ran the quarter
a whole
mile.
lot,
Okay.
and David Thompson and I had some good times
Oh,
together.
yeah. David was a good runner.
Yeah, I see David from time to time still. He comes by to see me anytime he's in town, so.
Do you ever know Wilbur Thompson?
I knew who he was.
We were running the same kind of meet up there before you got there. Wilbur came over to me. There was invitational meets. I'd let the kids run the races they wanted to run. I didn't try to stack them anything. Wilbur came up to me before the race and he said, Coach, he said, can I run those hurdles? They were 100-yard hurdles, low hurdles. And I said, well, let's go over there so you learn how to do it. He'd never done it. So I showed him how to get out and get in a hurdle. I'd been a hurdler myself, so I knew something about it. So he just learned the rhythms of it real quick, got in the starting blocks, and I mean, he crossed the finish line. Second place was 10 yards or 15 yards behind him. He had blistering speed.
Yes, he did.
And he was grinning from ear to ear. He'd never run those hurdles before. Now, I don't think he ever ran them again after that. But I used to marvel at how he'd run the 220, and the next race was a mile relay at the end of a track meet. And
Wow.
He'd run that 220, he'd already run the open quarter, and he'd run the 220 and turn right around and anchor the 440.
440 here, the mile relay.
The
Yeah.
mile relay.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't even breathe hard. I don't know whatever happened to Wilbur, because he was a tremendous athlete. Wasn't a very good student, but a good athlete.
He's in Detroit as well.
Is that right?
That's where David is too.
Oh, David's there too?
Yeah, that's
I'm pleased
just
to know
outside of
that.
Detroit. So.
Okay, I'm pleased to know that. I
Yeah.
hadn't heard of him for years.
Yeah.
Both of them good athletes.
Yeah, some of
Good,
the best.
good young men too. I have to say that
Absolutely.
for them.
Yeah, they tried to make me a hurdler once. I ran the hurdles once. Actually, I jumped the hurdles once, and you know what happens when you jump hurdles.
Or you can hit your shins on there, and my senior year, I ran track hurdles against the two best hurdlers in the state of Kansas at that period of time, and then both of them are still ranked up high. One from down southeast Kansas someplace, I can't think now, and the other one from Smith Center. I always had to run against the guy from Smith Center in the relays. But we were running the KU relays, and I got a good start, and I was a half a step ahead of both of them in the finals. And I'm grinning to myself that I won't beat these suckers, so they're always wound up third. The next to the last hurdle, on my kick foot, I kicked the hurdle on my way up, and I went over it, sprawled out, skinned myself on. That was a cinder track. Got up, finished fifth out of 6 runners. I'm sitting in the dressing room picking cinders out of my knees and my elbows and my wrists.
Been there, done that.
What was a basketball coach at OU? I mean at KU. anyway, he came walking by and he said, aren't you Otto and Rouge track boy? I said, yes, sir. And he says, young men, you got all those trainers. I had 4 trainers picking stuff out of me. Well, you talk about an important man. That's the first time I'd ever met him. It realized he had spoken to our graduating class at graduation in high school.
Wow.
Dang, why can't I think of his name? Fall Gallon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was running through some of them in my head, which one it might be.
Gallon. Well, when he spoke, everybody jumped, I'll tell you that.
I need to be upset if I said Naismith, so.
Yeah, no, it wasn't Naismith. That's a little too far back. But that's about the size of it, I guess. There's a million stories that can be told, and some of them are real.